Hello, Miss Powell. At least I think it's Miss Powell. It wasn't made entirely clear to me who is going to be watching this. And if it's not, then hello, Mr. Pollard. Today, we are going to be talking about My Stroke of Insight. Cleverly named. So basically, it was about a neuroanatomist named Jill Bolt Taylor, who decided that she needed to include the fact that she had a PhD on the front cover of the book. But honestly, she had a stroke and recovered and wrote a book, so I think that she gets a pass on that one. Basically, she was a Harvard medical student, performing research and teaching about the human brain, and eventually she became known as the singing scientist for a company called Brain Bank because she developed these songs to travel the country and inform students through lectures about everything that she had learned. Because if you didn't sing, then people would get bored. So she was kind of revolutionary in that fact. She won some awards. She was very smart. But on December 10th, 1996, she had a rare hemorrhage from an undiagnosed congenital malformation of blood vessels that erupted in her head and caused a rare stroke in the left hemisphere of her brain, which I'm going to get into very quickly. But the most common form of stroke starts with ischemic arteries, which carry the blood into the brain, and then their shape begins to taper smaller and smaller as they travel further away from the heart. And the arteries carry life-supporting oxygen that is necessary for cells, including neurons, to survive. And then eventually a blood clot travels into the artery until the tapered diameter of the artery becomes too small for the clot to pass any further. So then it's blocking that oxygen-rich blood that is supposed to go to the cells to the point of obstruction, and then the brain cells will traumatize and oftentimes die. There's also a hemorrhagic stroke where blood escapes from the arteries into the brain. The one she had was actually AVM, or arteriovenous malformation, which is a rare form with abnormal arterial configuration, which means that there's no buffering system of the capillary bed between the artery and the vein. So then the vein eventually breaks from pressure and blood spills from that into the brain. And the day that it actually happened, she woke up feeling kind of dizzy. She had a dull throbbing headache. She got up and started working out, and she was still feeling a little bit dizzy, lightheaded. She didn't really understand what was going on, and she pretty much just felt out of place. But eventually she came to the realization that something is wrong. I'm having a stroke, which she wouldn't have known without her prior neuroanatomist knowledge, most likely. But she went through this whole process of trying to contact for help, which I've told a couple people because it was so surprising. The fact that she couldn't remember the emergency number to call. She couldn't remember 911. And she was like, I can't call my mother because my mother's going to freak out. And she was thinking maybe I can call into work because she was supposed to go there anyway. But she had to go through this whole process of remembering the number, but she couldn't remember the extension number, the 3 numbers in the beginning or whatever. And she was going through this process like in her mind where she had random waves of clarity. She would repeat what she needed to do over and over, and eventually when she got that wave of clarity, she could remember a number, and eventually she got it, and she got all the numbers down. And when she was typing into the keypad, she had to cover up the number that she had written down with one finger, otherwise she would lose her place. But there was a point when she looked up at the keypad, typed a number, looked down, and looked up again, and couldn't recognize any of the squiggles on there. But that also came in waves of clarity, so it ended up taking her 45 minutes, I think she said, so around that time, to actually dial the number. So she was late for work, and she repeated what she wanted to say in her head, like, this is Jill, I need help. But what actually came out was just a bunch of mumbling, but the guy could tell from her mumbles that she was in trouble, and they eventually got somebody there, which I think is just, like, if you see that happening to yourself and you know that it's happening, wouldn't you panic? But she kind of, the entirety of the time, she remained fairly calm, which was very surprising and probably essential to her recovery. But some of the warning signs that she saw were speech, struggling with speech, tingling of the extremities, trouble remembering things, trouble with balance, feeling off balance all the time, a killer headache, not just normal headache or a migraine, and eyes, any vision problems you were having. But it wouldn't just be one of these things happening, probably a combination of many of them, and then you could identify, maybe I'm having a stroke, or maybe you could recognize it in somebody else. But from the get-go, she did see things from an interesting perspective, because she saw in herself things that she had studied before, and this, amongst many other factors, actually became important for her recovery. So one of the first main ideas that we're going to get into is the difference between the left and the right hemispheres as she explains it from her experience. her biggest initial challenge, besides getting help, was finding the desire to get better, because she felt like she was in this constant state of euphoria and she felt unmotivated to come back to a highly structured routine. But before we can understand that, we have to discuss how she experienced the difference between the two. She said that they do communicate with each other through the corpus callosum, but other than that, the hemispheres are completely separate in the way that they help us perceive ourselves and the world around us. In that sense, from her experience, she was saying that the right hemisphere is all about the present moment, the here and now, and it thinks in abstract pictures and kinesthetically through feeling the movement in our bodies. And the information came in just streams of energy that were simultaneously coming in like an overload, and a big collage of what the present moment was, what it looked like, tasted like, smelled like, etc. And she explained that we are all energy beings connected to the energy around us through the consciousness of our right brain hemispheres. Now, the left brain is different in the fact that it thinks methodically, that it also brings in elements of the past and the future, which I actually referenced in, I think, my last book, Stumbling on Happiness, how humans are pretty much the only mammal to have, or animal to have the ability to predict the future, and analyzing all the outcomes in the most positive one, goals to get there. The left hemisphere is what compares those things, and also compares us to other people, and tells us where we stand on scales like financial, academic, honesty. It also puts all of those thoughts and that incoming information into language, because it's the internal brain chatter that connects us to the external world. And it takes in all that incoming information and puts it into a form that we can understand, so then we can interact with that external world and exist in it. And most importantly, the left side of the brain teaches us that we are separate from the rest of the world. We're separate from everyone else and all the energy surrounding us. So that is the part of her that she lost when she had the stroke. Her brain chatter went pretty much totally silent, kind of like putting a TV on mute, and she found herself in a silent mind. She felt very fluid with the environment because of that. The world around her was, the fluidity with the world around her was actually a really big factor in why it took so much energy for her to want to recover in the first place, because she was lost in an existence of expansiveness and energy. And she actually used that word, both of those words, quite a bit, fluid and energy. Just, she used them so many times. So obviously that was a thing for her. But she even said herself, all details of my life and language were gone. Language is a kind of code, and things were no longer reduced to coding. I was looking at the big picture and could see how everything is related. Everything is in motion, connected in a dance of grace. And the brain is what imposes boundaries, and boundaries convey a perception of separation, but that's a delusion. Everything is one, and I got to sit in the space of silence that gurus meditate toward for years. So you can see that she didn't exactly have a negative response to the experience, because she felt as if she was in a peaceful state of nirvana. That being said, in the beginning, she did have some frustrations with the inability of the medical community to communicate with her or understand how to communicate with somebody in her condition. And stroke is one of the top disablers of people in society, so that was a little bit concerning to read. And they kind of treated her like she couldn't understand anything, but she did have all of these files of understanding tucked away. They were just currently inaccessible because she couldn't remember how to get there or why. She was wounded, but not destroyed. And she also emphasized that it is important for stroke survivors to communicate how they strategize recovery to help medical professionals be more effective in the initial hours of treatment in the future. We'll kind of move into the main idea number 2, which is how to recover mentally, emotionally, and physically, at least for her. But it's not necessarily true for everybody and how they recover, but this is her perspective. So again, she did have that initial advantage with some background knowledge, and although she couldn't remember, it may have been important for her remaining calm and actually interested in how her body worked so intricately to keep her fragile form upright. So she didn't really panic. She was more curious than anything. And she found other ways to communicate with the external world through body language, because her right hemisphere was working kinesthetically. For example, if there was a nurse that was a little bit rougher or impatient with her, she would not cooperate. She would not try to understand what they were saying. She would not give an effort back. But if somebody talked to her kinder, softer tones, she liked that. and they were like adjusting her pillow, making her feel more comfortable. She would try to do what they asked. And that kind of made them understand the kind of care that she needed. And her mother actually was a big support system in this and was there to help her stimulate those inactive neurons, because if they weren't stimulated like from the get-go, they may have died. Which I think everything just happens by chance sometimes. I mean, if she didn't have the mother that she had and her mother wasn't, then a lot of her neurons probably would have died and she wouldn't have been able to inform everybody else about this. But everything happens for a reason. But for example, she couldn't understand that when she was walking on a sidewalk after she went home, that the lines in between were insignificant. Like, you didn't have to worry if you stepped on them. But the lines on the side that separated the sidewalk from the grass were significant, because if you stepped off it, you could fall. She also just needed to be told what color was and explained what depth was. Some things are far, some things are close, with a visual, to just have these sudden moments of realization, because her files opened back up. She was able to reconnect things and understand how they worked. However, there was a long time after her stroke where she was kind of like an infant. She couldn't talk, she had forgotten how to walk, and her math and reading abilities were just completely gone. And somebody actually gave her the pieces to a baby's puzzle, and she stared at them without comprehension because she couldn't understand what shape was, so she didn't know what she was looking at. She was still having trouble defining dimensions between two things, separations between things. She didn't understand that you were supposed to piece things together because she didn't know what that was. She eventually learned to make connections between meanings of things in front of her. And she found that in order to learn anything, she had to take something from the previous moment and apply it to the present one. And then she was able to connect the two. So when her left hemisphere was completely non-functional early on, it was pretty much impossible for her to learn. Because to her, such things were just unrelated actions, and she didn't have the physical cognitive ability to figure out the appropriate sequencing of events. Like, for example, she could put her socks and shoes on physically, but she didn't understand what socks or shoes were, and she couldn't understand why one needed to go on before the other. But she and everyone around her that was supporting her, especially her mother, figured out to celebrate her small accomplishments and not compare her to what she had been, but what she may be in the future. So they kind of took things step by step, and she did things from turning to rolling to rocking to eventually standing. It was very deliberate. And there were a lot of other things that helped her recovery, especially sleep. She slept a lot in this book, which they don't necessarily recommend, but they did trust her body to understand what it needed, and one of those things was sleep. She didn't want to overstimulate, which also comes up in the list, but a lot of it was with her support system again, and understanding that she was only wounded and not stupid. Some of the other things that she included in her list about recovery, what she needed for recovery, were she needed people to treat her as though she would recover completely. Because if they ever doubted it, then she would too. There was a lot of negative energy that she would take in if people were unconfident in her abilities to recover. And she needed those people around her to believe in the plasticity of her brain. And she needed to be protected from overstimulus, such as obnoxious noise, which, I don't know if you've noticed, but my brother's not home, which is why there hasn't been a bunch of screaming. She needed them to love her for who she might become and not who she had been in the past. And they needed to challenge those brain systems immediately, and of course, lots and lots of sleep. So, a third main point: how the experience changes you as a person and how that can be seen positively. So, eventually, she did learn to regain her previous capabilities, but she still had that experience viewing things from a more peaceful and positive perspective. And she actually was able to actively choose to avoid and letting those feelings of such feelings of negativity like meanness, sadness, pain, with experiences that she was taking in linger any longer than they needed to, because they might have made her act in negative ways or make her feel bad. And she understood that she could control what she wanted to feel and when. And she overall became very happy about the complete dominance of her left mind, more with the right, where she was more in touch with her emotions. She actually said, "In the wisdom of my dementia, I understood that this body was, by the magnificence of its design, a precious and fragile gift. It was clear to me that it functioned like a portal through which the energy of who I am can manifest here. And I wondered how I could have spent so many years in this construct of life and never realized that I was just visiting. So in the end, I didn't really have a whole lot of questions because she pretty much thoroughly explained. I did wonder what a stroke even is, how it happens, how people recover, and she actually gave many examples for how strokes happen, and she did not necessarily give a general view on how people recover, but how she did, which is probably true for many stroke survivors, meaning that the way of recovery is subjective to the person who was affected, because they become anew and not necessarily recover exactly who their old self was. But she was always referring to the left and right hemisphere, or left and right brain, but I, for some reason, thought that wasn't allowed, because they worked in conjunction with each other, and I didn't think that you were really supposed to say, like, I'm more left-brained or I'm more right-brained. But I guess it did make sense in the fact that she was using the terms to describe her different experiences, with one side's functions dominating over the other. There was a point when I was reading the book when it actually really got me thinking, when she was struggling to read. Like, she literally called this out. She was like, do you ever think about how amazing your brain is right now? And I was like, okay, because the simple task of knowing that a certain squiggly line or a curvature makes a sound that connects to the other curves and squigglies around it, that makes more sounds, and eventually it forms a word, which forms a sentence, which is actually supposed to have some sort of significance, and sometimes we can picture things in our head because of past memories that we have with it, which is just so incredible that all of that happens in like 2 seconds. You know how fast I am talking to you right now, and you're just understanding all of it, I hope, but it just seems like our brains would constantly overload, and which it gave me an insight about the responsibility that our brains have, but also the resiliency that they have. And we've been learning about that in class right now too, in biology, about like how you can remove half the brain, and some of it can take over for the other half, usually when you're younger, neuroplasticity and stuff, but it's just so incredible. And I have, because of that, been mentioning this book to a lot of people and suggesting that they read it, because it kind of applies to everything. It's not just about a stroke. It's about human insight. And another thing that I took away was how we look at recovery, which I kind of mentioned before. So a lot of the times when we ask about recovery, we're like, are you back to normal? And normal is different for a lot of people, because Jill is different in a way that she likes. And so she answers the question with 8 years, as that's how long it took her to feel capable and like her whole reinvented self again. I'm going to end it with the fact that she says there is about a 90-second chemical response to external stimuli, which floods you with emotions. So you get to watch the process begin and end. And after that, if you continue to feel negatively about the external stimulus that you just accepted, like fear or anger, etc., you can look at the thoughts that are looping and the ones that you're rethinking, and you can reevaluate what it is that is making you feel that way. She gained this understanding of control that she actually believes we can all manage, which was very inspiring, and maybe I'll remember it for next time when I start freaking out about anything. But overall, it was a very interesting book, and I don't know how many of them you have read, but I say this about all of my books because I think I choose good books, but read this one. Why is this constantly a problem I have? This is an uncomfortable angle. You know, I thought maybe we would get some good lighting for once, but apparently that's just not how I roll. That'll work. That will work! I'm sorry, you're never gonna see this. I don't know what's wrong with me. Okay. Hello, Miss Powell. I hope it's Miss Powell. I wasn't actually made entirely clear who was going to be watching this. So if it's not, hello, Mr. Pollard, but I'm pretty sure it's Miss Powell. I hope you were enjoying motherhood. That's fun. We miss you. Well, I mean, like, this is a really bad intro. Oh, I forgot about the slate thing. It was really helpful last time. Hello, Miss Powell. I hope. It wasn't made entirely clear who was going to be watching this, so if it's not Mrs. Powell, then hello, Mr. Pollard. If it's either or, then still... What? ear itches, sorry. Okay, she had a rare hemorrhage from an undiagnosed congenital.
Congenital.
There's also a hemorrhagic.
Hemorrhagic.
I was right. A hemorrhagic stroke. Hemorrhagic snow. The one that she had was actually AVM, which is
Arteriovenous.
Arteriovenous. But she woke up before work and she actually went to work out. Impressive. Because I don't know how you can do that when you wake up in the morning before work. But method. And the fact that it thinks methodically. Methodically? And she got to sit, and I got to sit in the space of silence. Gurus met, and there was a lot of patience from the people that they needed them and understand herself, what she liked, and she understood that she could control what she wanted to feel and when, and she overall became very happy.
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong.